So, Chair Yarmuth, I mean, how can we spend $6 trillion and all the other money that President Biden wants to spend? How can we afford it?
We can't afford it because we determine how much money's in the system and at the federal level. You know, the federal government is not like any other user of currency, not like any household, any business, any state or local government. We issue our own currency, and we can spend enough to meet the needs of the American people. The only constraint being that we do have to worry about inflation from that spending. Now, you know what? So many people say, well, we've got so much debt, and our grandchildren are going to have, it's going to be on their backs and so forth. That's not the way it works. And I think the American people need an education about how the monetary system does work. I remember going back, Greta, to when Paul Ryan was chair of the Budget Committee, and even before that, and all of these forecasts of gloom and doom about, oh, we're going to accumulate so much debt and interest rates are going to crowd out all other spending. Well, we basically doubled the national debt from the recession in 2009 until last year before the pandemic. And none of the things that people warned would happen happened. We didn't have inflation. We had record low interest rates rather than higher interest rates. And the dollar was trading within normal levels vis-a-vis other currencies. So I think a lot of economists now have begun to say, wait a minute, maybe we've been thinking about debt in entirely the wrong way. And even Fed Chair Jay Powell has basically said, we have the fiscal space to do what we need to do right now, to make the investments we need to make to build the kind of economy for the future that we all hope we'll have.
Well, why are people wrong about this, and how should we be thinking about debt and deficits?
Well, I don't get any royalties from this, but I would flog a book called The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton, an economist and professor. And it's become quite a bestseller, actually. And what she says is that if you look at the total national debt, $28 trillion right now is what we think of as the national debt. She said, don't think of it as debt. Think of it as all the money that the federal government has invested in the country over our history minus taxes. And that's really what it is. I mean, those $28 trillion didn't exist before the federal government issued them. And so the federal government has the ability to create money, create financing, and that's what we've been doing, we'll continue to do. The thing that I am so impressed about from the Biden administration is that they're reversing decades and decades of our asking questions in the wrong order. Historically, what we've always done is said, what can we afford to do? And that's not the right question. The right question is, what do the American people need us to do? And that question becomes the first question. Once you've answered that, then you say, how do you resource that need? And that's not just money, that's also capacity. So, for instance, there's a $225 billion investment in child care in the American Families Plan. But you can't just say we're going to give $225 billion to people to pay for their child care because there's not enough capacity. So what you do is you'd make a false promise to the people, and then you would drive the price of existing child care even higher. So what you have to do is spend part of that money on building capacity so that there's enough child care to actually service the people who need it. So again, they're just very different ways of thinking about money, and I understand why most people don't understand this concept, because they think of it in their own framework, which is their household, which is you can't borrow so much money that you can't pay back. But that's not the position that the federal government's in.
Congressman, are you saying we can just print more money and there's no consequences?
There could be consequences if there is too much inflation. So let me give you a hypothetical. We could say that we're going to give every American family a $200,000 voucher to buy a house. We could create the money to do that. But what would happen? Well, there's not enough housing, so the prices of existing houses would go through the roof, no pun intended. And again, you'd be creating a false promise, but meanwhile, you drive up the housing market to unsustainable levels. So there is a limit as to how much money we can inject into the economy. The thing about the rescue plan, and here's where I think Kevin Hearn makes a mistake, is he said $6 trillion American Families Plan and Job Plan. It's not quite that much, but that's over 8 to 10 years. So the $6 trillion budget that the president proposed actually would have been $5.7 trillion if you had had no American Jobs Plan or American Rescue Plan, because only $300 billion of that is in fiscal year 22. So again, you've got to realize these are numbers that are very large, of course, but they're spread out over a number of years. And that's why I think the Fed chair and others have said we have the fiscal space to do this, because injecting this over a period of time will not cause the kind of inflation that is dangerous.